In this video, I want to share some tips to improve and to learn how to master a new game. Many times people approach a new game, they get hooked, but if their first experience, they don't know how to study a game in depth, they don't know practically how to improve. And so I hope in this video I can give some tips that are general for any game. Of course, I would mention many times Hive because it's the one I have a fairly amount of experience in it, but it's true for almost any game as far as I know. I try to translate my experience and what I have read or watched about psychology and neuroscience into practical learning tips specific for studying and improving at these games. Some of them might be obvious or trivial, but still they shouldn't be underestimated, so I have to repeat them anyway. To me, it all boils down to 6 main principles: attention, connection, repetition, emotion, transfer, and experience. So the first one is attention. Apparently, human beings are not very good at multitasking. So if we focus on one activity only at a time, eventually we will be rewarded. These are my advice. Probably very trivial, but still very important. So when you dedicate 15, 20, 30 minutes of your time to play a game or to read a book about your game, switch off any digital or physical distraction. Just try to be in the zone as much as possible. Don't get distracted by anything in your environment. The same is valid when you read a book, when you play a game, when you play a game in real time, especially when you play a correspondence game as well. Don't do like I do. Don't play when you are on the bus or before going to sleep or in any other weird situation where you're not focused and you just play your move because of it. I know it's silly, but it needs to be said. The second one is a bit less trivial, is connection. So from my experience, new concepts can be fixated much better in our brain when we establish connection between them, either between two different ideas or the same idea but in different contexts. For example, when you learn a language, okay, and you study the certain words, you have some vocabulary, you might forget very easily, but if you hear the same word that you learned today in a few more days, maybe in a movie or you read it in a book or from a friend, you will immediately recollect the meaning of that word if it happened not too long ago. And then you connect two things, especially if they happen in different contexts, so one time was in a book, another one was in a movie, another one was in a real life. If it's the same stimulus in the same context, it's a bit less effective. There's no connection between two things. It's just the same thing, right? What I think is better also is that the second stimulus happens after a certain time, but of course not too long after the first one, right? Because otherwise you just forget what that word means. But at the same time, it doesn't have to be too short, otherwise there's no difference between the two. So of course, many times we have no clue about when a certain stimulus will occur, right? We don't know when we are gonna hear a certain word, just to use the metaphor of language again, the analogy of the language. But we have to do two things. First is put ourselves in the situation where it's more likely that the stimulus arise. So of course, if you want to study a game, but you never play or you never open a book, you're never gonna find yourself in that situation, right? And second, you have to be ready at recognizing the stimuli. And they have to take notes of this connection in a book, in a notebook. What I use is a Google Doc, for example. And whenever I play a game and I see there is a certain theme, a certain idea, a certain opening, I take a screenshot of the critical position with a short comment and I put it in a Google Doc, so that the next time when I see the same concept, the same idea in a different game, either I play or I watch someone else playing or whatever, I can put another comment in the same section, and that will strengthen the idea that I have of that concept. okay? The memorization of that concept and the interiorization of that concept. This is also true if you find connection with something outside games. So in the real world, if there's anything that reminds you of that idea, even if it's a very abstract idea, I don't know, something that is very efficient, something with a certain shape, still it's a sort of connection. If that helps you to reinforce that idea, that's fine as well. Just take note and put it in the Google Doc, okay? So try to find connection between different situations of your life. Again, sometimes you not expect a certain connection, but you have to be ready at recognizing them and taking notes. I think it's a quite important, interesting idea. Okay, another principle is repetition. As everyone knows, practice makes perfect, right? So you might have all the concepts clear, you think you have them clear, but you struggle to recognize them and to use them properly in the game. So in order to retrieve them from your memory, pick them up quickly and use them, apply them in your games, they have to become like a second nature to you, okay? There are different methods to do that, but repetition is what matters. There is in chess, for example, a book. It is a chess book called The Woodpecker Method. It's just a collection of puzzles, basically. And you just go through all the puzzles. Maybe, let's say you have a battery of 100 puzzles. You go through them from top to bottom. Initially, it might take like 5-10 minutes for each puzzle to be solved, depending on how difficult they are. But the key thing is that once you finish, you just go back and you do them again. Maybe the day after a few days. Of course, 100 puzzle, it might take a few days already to finish, but just go on from the beginning and do it again, and you'll see that it takes much shorter to solve the puzzle, right? Because you have solved it already and something will click in your mind. So you do that again and again and again until basically every puzzle can be solved by you in a matter of seconds, okay? You'll just look at them and say, okay, I know what's the move. Cool. This basically increases your pattern recognition skills, okay? You intuitively know what's happening without having to think about it, okay? Something else that I've done when I was a kid, I was studying chess, was to go through a database of games for a specific opening. For example, I was studying the Caro-Kann, and I was going through all Karpov's game, who was famous for playing the Caro-Kann, and I just went through. I will skim through quickly through the game. I didn't have to stop and analyze every single move. Of course, it's something you normally should do, but in this kind of training, you just go through quickly, and you will see that naturally you observe certain moves, okay, that are typical of that position, of that pattern, okay? And even if you're not sure 100% why that move is played, doesn't matter, but you will naturally apply that move, you try that move in your own games, and then at that point, you will actually think about them in a more structured way, right? And you will think, okay, now I understand why that move was good or why the move was bad. Or, I mean, you basically force yourself to think about the moves while you find yourself in that situation, okay? I think it was quite useful. Of course, repetition also trivially means just practice, right? So the more you play in a like focusing, remember what I said before about attention, the more it becomes familiar to you. And the best is always to practice with feedback, right? So someone that tells you something at the end of the game. That's the best, of course. Just practicing for the sake of it without focusing or without feedback is not useful per se. Another one is emotion. So I think motivation is a key to become better, right? To improve at your game. Of course, becoming the next world champion could be a good motivation for many of us, but it's a bit too abstract. And usually we need something a bit more practical, a bit closer to us, right? And the good thing is that we can use this to our advantage. So we need to take advantage of the emotions during the journey rather than connected to the final goal, right? So beating a strong player, for example, is satisfying, of course, but it's more satisfying the moment you play rather than actually the end, right? So we have to enjoy the moment while we play or while we prepare against the opponent, even discussing the game afterwards with your friends. So it's not the achievement per se, but anything that makes it more enjoyable around it, that helps you to stay motivated and to remember things. So what I suggest is, I mean, it's very trivial as well, but just set a regular training session with friends, okay, with people you feel comfortable with, um, because that's the best way to improve your memory, improve your skills. Of course, the more closer to your level these people are, the better. At the same time, you will see that the more comfortable, the more jokes you can make, the more you will feel confident, and better you will remember what you've done in a certain session. I remember much better openings, for example, or just certain moves, certain ideas after a discussion with a friend, or some openings that were played by a specific player, so I connect them to a certain player. Maybe the first time I saw them, or the first person who talk about this opening to me, so I connect them to a certain person, and that helps a lot. Of course, physical sensation, physical emotion, if I can say, count as well. So if you play in a physical set, I think it's much better than playing online. Of course, not everyone can find or can play with a physical set all the time. It's much easier to find someone online, but in general, looking at the screen is something that we do every day, and it loses of some intensity, right? Emotional intensity. So it's harder to relate, to connect. At the same time, I think also learning to play by yourself is quite important, especially with the physical set. If you just started and you feel it might be something stupid, you don't have to think about it. It's very important to put yourself in both white and black positions, in both players, right? Especially if you use a physical set, you'll see that the emotions that come with it are very different, and I think they're worth it, and they help you a lot to remember things. A last tip about this, although I don't know if I should advise it or not, but some people use negative feelings as a fuel to actually improve. Garry Kasparov, one of the best chess players of all time, said that one of his personality traits that actually made him become one of the best was that he hated to lose at chess. So he used this hate to push himself into study more and spending more time on it and becoming the best. So in some cases could work, but I think normally positive emotion work much better. So if you're excited about playing with a certain person rather than you hate a certain person when you play with them and you want to beat them, I think it's much better. If you think about a cool game that you watched, if you get impressed by a player, you want to become like them rather than you want to smash them, I think that's better. But people are different, so they may work in different ways, so I thought I would mention this idea. Another one is transfer. So you only learn something really when you can teach it to someone else. Someone said to your grandma. Of course, I don't suggest you to force your grandparents to play with you unless they enjoy it. So the point is, if you learn something exciting from a game or a book or any other source, try to teach it to someone else. It might be your playing regular partner, someone else who is new to the game, whoever, but just try to get it out, because you'll see that as you explain it, as the words come out of your mouth, you really understand that idea. Many times we think we understand that, but then when we talk about it, we can't explain it or we are not sure 100%, which is useful as well, because we put it out and then maybe sometimes we figure out that move or that idea was not actually as good as we thought. So either case is useful. Just transfer. Go give it to someone else. Okay, so every time you teach, you'll get something back as well, some feedback. Of course, if you teach to someone who is much lower in skill than you, if you just teach the rules of the game, you might not get much in return. So you might have to find someone who is closer to your level, of course, but this is the point. And this is true as well if you try to describe your thinking process after a game. So after you play a game, a competitive game, for example, in a tournament or whatever, when your ideas are a bit more fresh in your mind, they haven't disappeared yet, try to explain it to someone else, okay? And see if it makes sense as well. Of course, the feedback from the other person is important, but it's also about just having a feedback from yourself. See if what you were thinking is the same thing that you're thinking at the moment, and when it comes out of your mouth, if it makes sense or not. Or write it down as well if you can't talk to someone else, and then you will look at your thoughts after maybe some days, weeks, and you will see how maybe distorted was your thinking at that moment. Okay, the last one is experience. So to use again the language analogy, when you learn a new language, you want to get exposed to other speakers, possibly native speakers, right? To make new experience. Simply because each speaker has a slightly different dialect, accent, they can use a different slang, a vocabulary. The same is true when you learn a game, especially for young games that don't have a literature, right? They don't have books or much videos where you can learn from. Every person is a walking book. Okay, every person is an encyclopedia you can learn from. Okay, so the more different players you play, and the more ideas you get exposed to, and better you will become, right? And better you will adapt this idea to your future games. So I often hear people saying that a certain game is broken or it's boring because they played like 50 times maybe with a partner, with just one person, and they run out of ideas, of course. I mean, that's natural, right? So in this situation, try to do something like this. Either you force yourself to play something new. It can be a new game, but even the same game in a different way. So like force yourself to play certain openings, or I don't know, if you play Hive, play without Pillbug, play without ants. I don't know, try something different, okay? Just to get out of the comfort zone. Sometimes it might be good also just to stop playing with that partner if you played for a year with the same person. Just don't play with that anymore, and then come back after a month and see how it goes. Of course, the best will be to play with that person at the same time, play with many other people. So you can bring what you learn from other people into your initial play partner. So the more different people you play, the better. Go on Board Game Arena, on Board Space, wherever, but just find people to play and learn from them. Even passively, they don't have to teach you something, but just look at new things like that you've never seen before will change something in your brain and will push you to do something better, to try the same ideas, or yeah, it will just be an extra stimulus that you never had before. So I really hope you found at least some of this principle useful, and let me know if you have any other idea or any other tip. Thanks for watching. If you liked it, subscribe to the channel, and see you again next time.